Hello, everyone. We are live. I'm Gabrielle Dolan. I'm sure you know that. And I am with the amazing Mark LeBusque. How are you, Mark?
Gabrielle, going very well. Good to catch up. We live 5 kilometres from each other, but the last time we actually saw each other face to face was in New York. So isn't that crazy?
New York 3 years ago. We by chance, we didn't even know we were going to be there, but we caught up for a beer in New York, which is pretty cool. And yes, that was 3 years ago. We should let everyone know. So we're live. So if you got a question for myself or Mark, or you want to just throw something at us, do it, and we will come to that. But Mark and I interestingly met at Harvard 7 years ago. Even though we both lived in Melbourne, we both worked in the corporate world. Our paths had never crossed until we were in the same classroom at Harvard. I reckon that was about 7 years ago, Mark. Is that right?
Yeah, it was actually coming up to 2014, so coming up to 8 years in May, actually, I think. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, it was great to meet yourself and some other. There was a lot of people from Australia in that program, as I recall.
It was one of those weird things. I think there was about like 60 people in the room, and everyone had to go and introduce yourself. And I knew there was two people from Australia there, and then people were going around going blah 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 from Australia, blah 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 from Australia, and everyone's going, wow, why are there so many people from Australia? And I'm thinking the three that I knew, including myself, hadn't even introduced ourselves yet. So it was actually a good conversation because there was about 8 of us there out of 60 from Australia, which was a pretty high percentage.
It was indeed, and I think we Aussies made our mark over the 7 or 8 days as well.
Well, I know you made your mark, Mark.
You did. You swore.
I swore. Okay, so just so you know, people, Mark's got hair at the moment. He decided when he was at Harvard, you had like a shaved head. You actually looked
I had like a number one.
Yeah, so he looked quite scary and intimidating, I must admit. And as we introduced ourselves, this is what Mark said in a room of Harvard. He goes, I'm Mark. I'm from Melbourne. I'm going to find the person in this room that thinks they're the smartest and destroy them.
Yeah, I had to go with something that went with the hairdo. But I'm a little bit more passive these days, Rob. I've grown up a bit since then.
You are. You're very passive now and humble.
So not sure about the second one.
No. So we're here. We're going to talk about, I don't know what we're going to talk about. We are going to talk about authentic leadership because we both play in that space. We're going to, the fact that we haven't sort of caught up. We're coming out of the end of COVID. We're going to probably talk about it, some stuff we've learned about ourselves. But what have you been noticing?
Look, all sorts of things. Obviously, people are really. I think one thing I've noticed is how people are really starting to have a bit of a perspective change and a think around what's really important to them. So, even working with a group today, we were talking about things that irritate us, like people leaving dishes above the dish on the bench above the dishwasher, and bins not being put out, and all of that stuff with what's happened in the last couple of years seems to not be able to jump from not really important to very important. The things that have become important to people, I think a lot are around their what people call work-life balance, or I call life design, is really starting to look at their health and their family and their connection and maybe the sort of work they want to do. So I'm seeing a lot of that, and I think that goes for us as well, Gabrielle. I think we've been through some similar things in the last couple of years, looking at what we're doing.
Yeah. Did you just call me Gabrielle? You can call me Ral. So you.
Oh, thank you. I was trying to be nice, but now I'm going to go back to that other Mark you described before.
Ral. Yeah. Ral is fine. Yeah, it's look, I think you're right. I think what some of the stuff the pandemic has I think what people are figuring out what's important to them, and people are talking about this great resignation. And I think part of that is like they're just going, actually, why am I doing this job I don't like? Or why am I working for this, dickhead who's not a good leader, or a company that I don't really, have any passion for, and are deciding actually to make the move. And perhaps they thought they couldn't the last 2 years. But they're making the move, and the whole, working wherever you want from has been, I think, a great thing that will come out of the pandemic as well.
Yeah, look, we've always got to have something that's great, So the latest great thing was the Great Resignation. I wonder whether it was a bit of a smokescreen for what's been going on for decades. Is that, you know, if you look at employee engagement, it hasn't materially improved in 30 or 40 years, and there's been a lot of signs before the pandemic that things weren't going all that well. And I just think it's been a little bit of a nudge for people to go and explore what they really want to do, which I think shows leadership in itself. Is that people are starting to step into their discomfort and say it's not just about the paycheck; it's about my whole life, and part of my life is work, and I want to be happier. So I applaud people that do it. I'm not so fussed about those who keep writing articles about the Great Resignation, because I think it's just a bit of old hat now.
Yeah, and it's I think, you know, if you treat your people well and you're developing them and you're a good leader, they probably won't be leaving you. They might be. Have you noticed any change in leadership? Like, we both work in the leadership space. Do you reckon you've seen a change in leadership styles over the last 2 years, or not really?
I think there's pockets of change which I really like, and there's a couple of things that are coming to mind for me. One is that I'm starting to notice that leaders are using more lived experience as a learning tool. And what that means is they've got to be a little bit more vulnerable. So I think there's been a bit of a step into vulnerability. And some of that comes, I think, Ral, because we've seen each other in our home offices like we are now. I've got all sorts of things just sitting behind me now in an office. And so I think some people are embracing that lived experience and sharing more about that, and which is bringing greater understanding between people. So I think that's a really good thing. Something else I've noticed is that people are talking about wanting to build deeper connection with humans, and because, again, we've seen each other in another environment, which is blended work and our home life. And I really encourage managers and leaders to keep doing that, is to be vulnerable and to share some of their lived, what's gone well, what's not gone well for them, so that people can see them as humans rather than as, you know, that sort of heroic soloist leader. So yeah, that's some things. What have you seen?
Well, I was going to say the same thing. I've been working with, I've got a client in New Zealand. It's a long-term client, but I've been working with this one particular team over probably the last 6 months. I've been doing thought leadership training with them. So I sort of see them on a regular basis. And I would have to say it's probably the leader. I did a podcast interview with him today because he's such an authentic leader. But I have noticed that he shows a lot of vulnerability with his team. Like, you know, this was a massive learning experience, and he always led from the front and said, you know, I'm learning as much as you. This is going to be hard. We're putting itself out there. And I would say his team, I have never seen a team so engaged, so committed to the cause, so respectful of him as a leader. And it was because of all those reasons I said, hey, I'm going to interview you for my Authentic Leadership podcast, which I actually did today. And one of the things he talked about was he says he's been trying to deal with his perfectionism, and as a leader, he always was the one that thought it's got to be right. You know, he'd get people to do it and he would oversee it, and it just came to this realization over the last few years that that's not actually a very good way to lead, and it stifles them. So he's actually deliberately stepped into vulnerability to address that. And what he said he started to do was share a lot of stories about his personal life. So, you know, he said, for example, he had been divorced like years and years and years ago, and he never spoke about it, but he started to speak about that. And very sadly, his current wife passed away last year with cancer, and he's got 3 children. And he said he talks about that, where years ago he would never bring that up. And what he said was it's actually really helped him as a person, and helped him as a leader, and helped his team say it's okay. And he said it's just the amount of respect that works. So we're having this whole conversation about, you know, the really good leaders will step into vulnerability, but you and I know there's still a lot that don't. There's still a lot, and for a whole lot of reasons.
Yeah, and look, I think it's I think with vulnerability, one of the things I do say to my clients, it's not a KPI or a competition. And sometimes someone can tell a really vulnerable story and everyone's like, let's back off because we haven't got anything as good as that. So I think one thing for managers and leaders to think about is be really clear that we're not here to compete in this. We're here to share and understand each other. Something, as you were talking about this fabulous leader and also the way that their teams engage, is the concept of mirroring, where people will start to mirror what they see from their leader. So if you are in a leadership role, one of the reasons why it's important to start to practice this stuff is that when people see you do it, they'll start to do it themselves. So, and if you don't do that, like you said, there are still quite a few that step away from it. The people will follow and they will mirror what they see. So, I say step into it like stepping into a pool. If you think it's going to be a bit cold, don't dive in. Just step down the steps, feel uncomfortable for a while, and then, acclimatize, and then maybe tell them another story and another story, but do that over a long period of time. I think sometimes we believe we've got to just jump in at the deep end.
Yeah,
And that can be that's dangerous.
Yeah, I think what scares a lot of leaders off is they're sort of, they keep hearing about being vulnerable and you got to be a vulnerable leader. And they think that is like revealing their deepest, darkest fears or something, or the biggest mistake they've ever made. And it's not. It's just, sometimes it's just a story about when you don't always get it right. There's a story, and whenever I teach people about telling stories, I go, sometimes the story is about when you just didn't live the value is more powerful than when you did live the value, and it's sort of just, it shows you human, as what you're all about is being human. It's just being real. And I think for leaders it should be a relief to say, you know what, you don't have to have all the answers, you don't have to be right all the time. And by acknowledging that and just going, look, I'm not quite coping with this. For example, this leader, he openly shared that he was, seeing a psychiatrist because he had never done this before. His wife had died. He was a single daddy. And he goes, I didn't know how to cope. And he goes, so I needed help. And he goes, and I would share that. I would just mention that, which, like a lot of other of his team had sort of said, yeah, look, I'm not coping either for a whole lot of other reasons. So
it's talking to a group today about what I call their stop stories, their self-limiting beliefs. What they tend to find is they share a story and then someone else goes, I've got that story as well. And then someone else says, I've been through that. So this ability to share and listen, to understand people, I think is important. Now, listen, if you want to talk about role modeling vulnerability, I read one of your LinkedIn articles not long back, which I featured in, which was about the time when you said you felt sick in the stomach because of your business was going beautifully, and then all of a sudden people were relying on you. Do you want to share a bit about that? Because I think it's a great one for anyone who's listening in to hear about.
Yeah, well, I guess it happened, and you did feature in this story. It happened probably about 6 years ago. I'd been in business. A few months before, my husband had said he's sick of working in the corporate world and he wanted to leave the corporate world. And I sort of said, well, give me give me a while to sort of, build up the business. And at the same time, I had asked one of my mates who was a teacher, was a primary school teacher, Elise. She taught my kids if she wanted to be my executive manager. And it just sort of coincided that on the same week, Steve resigned from his corporate job. So all of a sudden I'm the only, income earner. And at the same time, Elise said, yes, she will quit her job as a teacher and come and work for me. And I remember I'd just come back from an accountant, and I think the accountant had said something like, like he probably didn't mean anything by it, but he sort of said, you've got two people relying on you to be successful. And that, it actually made me realize not only two people relying on me, two people had left their careers. They had literally left their careers on the premise that I was going to be successful. And I seriously was about to throw up. And I remember we had a mentoring session where I was meant to be mentoring you, and we started, and I'm just going, Mark, blah.
It was I remember that really well, and what came to mind for me, and we do this very very seldom, I mean, no, quite a bit, not seldom, we do it a lot, is we actually start to find the bad news stories really quickly. Like your business was successful then, and it's very successful. It was very successful then, but you're like, oh shit. So why is it, do you think, we get dragged pretty quickly into the catastrophe rather than maybe stepping back a bit and going, hang on a minute, I've got this?
Yeah. Well, I think it happens because it's natural, and I think we all have self doubt. Like, all of us have self doubt, and there's times where we sort of question ourselves. So I think that's normal. I don't know why we do it, but I think maybe it's just human for us to do it. I guess the reality is how long you stay there. Like,
Yep.
I know I speak to a lot of successful people that will have self-doubt. And I remember interviewing Lane Beachley, and she sort of said when she was asked to be chair of Surf Australia, and so her first thought was, there's no way known I can do this because I don't have the business skills. They've never had a female chair before. And she went straight away into this thing, spiral, but then she came out and accepted the job. And I remember saying to her, I go, so how long were you doubting yourself? How long? Was it days? Was it weeks? Was it months before you accepted the job? And she goes, oh no, we're at lunch and I just went to the toilet. Literally she had that self-doubt for minutes and then came out, and so sometimes it's a mindset where a lot of people will just go into a spiral and not get out of it. And then, one of the ways to do that is surround yourself by supportive people. So I know you, like you were saying, I remember you said to me at the time, you went, Ral, bloody hell, if you have self-doubts, we're all stuffed. And because you were going, you've got this, of course you've got this. Why would you not? So you were my support. And then, one of our other friends, joint friends, Michelle, I rang her as well. And she again was saying, you've got this. They're adults. They're making choices. Don't carry the water for them. You've got to do it. So, yeah, I think the short answer is we all go there. It's just how long we stay there and how we can actually drag ourselves out when we know we're going there.
And I think going back to your example of your client in New Zealand, this is a great lesson for managers and leaders as well, is if you hang on to stuff and you don't share it, and the stories just keep compounding and keep coming out of your bad news filing cabinet, you'll end up, sucking your thumb in the corner of the room. And I think it's really important that we only stay there for a short period of time and we call on the support. I remember when COVID hit, and 99% of the work's in the room, I am literally in the corner of the room in the fetal position, sucking my thumb, thinking this is it. I had a pity party for about 2 weeks, but then luckily my client said, what are you doing, mate? Get up off the ground and start doing virtual work for us. But I see there's a quick,
so why come in? I think it's more of a comment. When our thoughts, emotions and actions become an addiction, then we will continue to double down on the behavior because it's satisfying 3 or more of our 6 human needs. Okay, Wyatt, there's some good insights. But I think it is. Yeah, I think it is just natural that we do it. But I guess it's knowing when it's happening and how you get out of it. And like Mark, you, me, probably a lot of people, when COVID hit, it was like, oh my God, this could be it. And for a lot of people, a lot of people like ourselves, it was it, because they, you just said, I spent 2 weeks in pity party. It's just like, but before a client, whatever, says, no, we still need this, and do it. But there was a lot of people that didn't react, didn't respond, for a whole lot of reasons. And it was really bad. It's been a really bad 2 years for them because of that.
Yeah, and look, if there's a moment of vulnerability for me here, in that 2 weeks, I deliberately didn't ring my clients because I didn't want to hear, oh no, we're done. So it's like the best thing to do was to avoid the conversation, which is what I try and teach my clients not to do, which is have the conversations you need to have. And, it was everything. I went into my human mode and just went, I'm really scared to hear that I might get rejected here. So I'll just lay in the corner for a while and see what happens. But, fortunately, things have ended up right. Now we're talking, me and you, as people who love being in the room, at like 50-50, you'd be okay.
Yeah. So isn't it interesting? When all this hit and we're in lockdown, I was constantly thinking, I cannot wait to travel again. I cannot wait to get back in person again. Even though the virtual training was working well, it was part of me is going, I cannot wait to get back. But I don't know about you, but I have traveled again. I've done quite a bit of travel. And you sort of go, it's not as good as it used to be. I can't remember it being like, and so, and it's not the same. Like you're in a plane and you got to wear masks but you're either in person and you go, yeah, it's good, but I'd be happy, for us to go back to maybe 50-50, where 50's virtual and 50's in person.
Yeah. Well, I know when I told myself that story, so it has changed. I've traveled a bit too, and it's like, yeah, something's different. But I remember way back when it was happening, one of my stories was just write it out. It'll be over soon and we'll be back in the room. But when I really dug underneath the layers, what it came down to was I had the most massive ego, and really I got all of what I felt about my self-worth was doing that work in the room. All I was saying is the clients really want it, but guess what? It was actually me, because it makes you feel good to be in the room. And then someone actually said to me, you know what, it's got nothing to do with your clients. It's got everything to do with your ego, mate. So get over that. And that was hard, but I'm really keen to do the 50-50 split. Travel. I was supposed to go to Hawthorne, 15 kilometres away about 2 weeks ago to catch up with someone for coffee. And I sent him a message and said, I really can't be bothered driving over. Let's do it online. And we did in the end. And I wouldn't have done that 2 years ago. I would have been in the car and not doing coaching online, all that. So you get in the car, you get on a plane. These days, I think we've adapted and we've actually found some time for ourselves out of all this, which I think is good.
Yeah. So I agree. Mark, I had exactly the same situation a few weeks ago where I'm running storytelling training for a client, but they wanted me to do one-on-one work with the CEO. So I gave them a few times, I said, look, we just need 2 1-hour sessions. I gave them some time, and then they came back and said, so I assume this is in person, and it's out at their, Burwood office, which is about a 45-minute drive. And I went, no, it's virtual. And then they came back and said, the CEO wants it to be in person. And I just came back, I would never have done this before. And I just said, well, if it's in person, I can't make those times because I need 3 hours, not an hour. But I 2 years ago, I would have made all the changes to actually, because it's a CEO and blah, blah, blah. And I'm going, nah. And, so you know what? They came back and said, oh, no, that's fine. We'll just do it virtual and keep it as is. And I was like, yeah, good. So it's that's 4 hours I have saved myself. And I know it's going to work just as well.
So in that sort of, I love it. And people that are on here listening, thinking about the time that they've been able to save, because something else that's come up recently is the research that says that we're working longer when we're working from home, around 45 to 52 minutes extra per day. What I'm hearing is we're having more meetings and all these sorts of things. So I wonder if there's going to be a productivity dip when people go back into the office, and which organisations are going to adapt. Let's not put a blanket rule in on people, because we don't want them to work the long hours, but we also don't want to lose productivity. So how do we make a decision that's going to work? And I want to encourage people that are listening to, this is where you've got to tell your story. And, you're great at the storytelling piece. What is your story for the last 2 years that you might have found some things out about yourself that have surprised you? Like, I do my best work at this time, or I'm in a unique situation where I need to do some things during the day, so I get to go and do that. I think people need to start to find their voices and speak up, or we might just fall back into the old pattern of subservience and walking back into something that didn't really work. What do you think?
Yeah, Mark, I think it's a really good thing. I think it's not only finding your voice to say, have that awareness of this worked for me, but it's also having the courage to put boundaries around your time. So I was absolutely amazed when 6 months into this, I had my corporate clients going, I'm Zoom fatigue because I'm in 12-hour meetings. And I'm going, why are you in 12? You weren't doing 12-hour meetings when you were traveling. So it's almost like this commute to and from work was a lot of times their downtime. They're sitting on a train or whatever driving, but that got taken up by meetings. And to me, I was astounded as this was across the board. I was thinking, why are we now expecting people to start work at 8 and finish at 8? But just because they don't have to travel? It's almost like you don't have to travel, so you've got time for more meetings. When what we should have been doing, and this is individual, so again, people listening to this, what you should be doing is having the courage to put boundaries around my non-negotiables. And I know sometimes that is a hell of a lot easier said than done, but if you don't push back on these things, what you're doing is prioritizing everyone else's priorities over yours.
And here's something for people to think about. I remember in my last role when I was at Post, which I enjoyed it there, but I remember in the end so many meetings, and I would ask people, I had a coach one time who said, you only go to meetings for 2 reasons. We're either sharing information or we're making decisions. So you've got to establish some boundaries around that. And then the other thing he said was, the information you're sharing, do you really need a meeting to share the information? So in the end, I would say to people very respectfully, what's the meeting about? And they'd be like, we're going to discuss the thing. And I'm like, what thing? So if we're sharing information, can you send it to me? Yeah, okay, thank you. I won't come to the meeting then. If we're making decisions and you want me there to be part of that, I'll do that. So I think people have got to start to be courageous enough to, because I reckon meetings has been the killer. They've gone through the roof.
Yep.
Now, here's a crazy little theory I have on that too, Ral.
Yes, tell me, crazy Mark.
The 2-year trust experiment that we've just run during COVID that is about, can we trust our people to do work when we can't see them? Maybe we're having meetings so we can keep seeing them, which is old school 1980s management style. What I want to say to people is, I think the evidence is clear and the evidence is in and overwhelming that we can trust our human beings to do good work when they're not in front of us. So get your head out of your backside, people, if you're still caught in the old way of, if I can't see Ral, physically, she might be hanging a washing out, or she might be playing with a dog, or she might be having a swim, but maybe she's already done 4 hours work of really deep work when she was uninterrupted. So what are you thinking about that?
Yeah. So what used to really annoy the hell out of me when I worked in corporate and there was like developing processes, it seemed we developed processes and systems on people doing the wrong thing. When you're going, 99% of people will do the right thing. So why don't develop a process based on the small number of people that will take advantage? And it used to annoy the hell out of me. And you're right. I've always said that the reason people would go, they can't work from home. It's a trust. It's a purely a trust thing. And so now the pandemic forced them to do this. And, I think all the research at the start with productivity actually went up, but it's also too, it was like, so what if someone's going out for a 1-hour walk during the day to walk the dog? They're actually promptly thinking of work and they probably come back with great ideas and do it. I think the leaders that are still thinking, no, I need them in the room, or I want you at meetings all the time, and from a level of trust, if you cannot trust your people, like first of all, why do you have them working for you if you can't trust them? And if you can't trust them, then don't expect them to trust you. So I agree. Get your head out of your bloody stuck in the 80s, and it's just not leadership. It is just such bad leadership. And so hopefully, again, I think the really good leaders trust their people.
And I'm seeing some great examples of that too. Hey, we were going to have a little chat about remote working now, like as in now that we can work remotely, about different things that we've tried. So I know you've also talked about your boundaries of putting in at least 2 holidays a year now. Maybe you weren't doing that before. I think that's great too. Have you got any thoughts about doing some remote work, as in maybe going away somewhere and doing something like that?
Yeah, so one of the things, and you talk about boundaries. About 5 or 6 years ago, I put in a boundaries that I don't work school holidays. So as in I don't do delivery. And look, I'll write and I'll maybe have meetings, but I don't actually do delivery. And we've got part of that made that really doable is we've got a holiday property up on Bermagui up the New South Wales coast. So it's an 8-hour drive. So even if someone said, could you come and run a workshop? It was like, no, because I'm not driving home to do it. So the cool thing is about working anywhere. There have been times this year where I've got like 2 virtual workshops and that's all I've got for the week is we can go to Bermagui and I can do it from there because if you got internet and, your Mac, I can do it from anywhere. So absolutely loving the flexibility that will give me. Mark, for the first time, I actually don't have any kids in school, but I'm still using the I don't work school holidays rule because
that's a good idea.
It sort of breaks your year up into like little 10, 12-week blocks. But yeah, I think that's going to be a real bonus. Loving and yeah, the other thing I got out is learning out of COVID is I'm always going to have 2 holidays planned because we just hadn't had holidays. And to me, my holidays aren't even Bermagui. That's sort of like our second place. I'm talking real travel stuff. And once I do one of those, I look to the next holiday we can book.
Love it. We've done a couple of things the last 2 years. We've gone across to Tassie for a month. And we've hired a house for a month in a place called Dolan in the sort of north central Tassie. And so Alison runs an accountancy practice. So she does virtually and we work Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And then the other days we go and adventure around the great state of Tasmania. We've already booked to go again next year. And I just think it's a really nice way of showing the positives that have come out of the last couple of years that we would never have thought of doing that 2 years ago. And it's a nice way to like not be in each other's way. But I got to say, I've got a greater appreciation for what accountants do. I thought it was all spreadsheets, BAS statements and things like that. It's not, it's so much more. Alison doesn't still not have an appreciation of my work. She calls it that voodoo stuff that you do to people. I'm not interested in that, but just the chance to get away another environment and still do good work for your clients, but at the same time, turn it into a bit of what we call an experimental adventure has been fantastic. So I'd encourage people where they can to be a bit bold and say, hey, is this something that you would entertain? For me, as maybe going somewhere else, I could think of better places to be, even though I love Melbourne in the middle of winter, for instance.
Yeah, I think you're right, Mark. Like, we're probably in a good position where we're running our business and we can do that type of stuff. But I think regardless of where you are, think about what would be your ideal life. And what I'd say to people is don't go, oh, I couldn't possibly do this now. It's almost like we're making up the decision. And some people don't even ask. Like, you could go to your employer and go, hey, this is my ideal situation. And you might be surprised. They might go, okay, well, if you think we can make it work, let's make it work. Or you might not get 100%, but there might be a compromise. But I think people have to sort of think about what would my ideal life look like with work and home and whatever, and have that as a goal. And maybe it's a question of just asking and having the conversation, because you'd be surprised what maybe people are a lot more open to this than they were 2 years ago.
I think they are. Look, the other thing I didn't mention there that I should, like, people are they've got very unique circumstances, different circumstances. They're at different stages of their lives. So some, the Tassie thing may not work for some people, but I love your point is if you don't ask, this is the old sales thing, if you don't ask, you don't get.
Yeah.
Organizations, managers, people making decisions around this stuff don't have crystal balls that let them know, like, this is what Ral wants. So unless you put something out there, you can either go 2 ways here. You can sit in the back and whinge a bit about it, or you can step into your leadership and ask the question and maybe get curious about what could work.
Yeah, exactly. Well, hey, Mark, this has been good. We've had a good chat. It's not New York. It's not in a pub in New York, but it's just as good.
That was pretty cool. No, it's It's in a home office in Ascot Vale.
Yeah, I'm in Ascot Vale.
And Brunswick West. So, again, we're not that far away from each other, but hopefully we get to catch up human to human again one day.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, thanks, Mark. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. Hope you found this of value. And, put in comments. We'll get back to any comments that are in the thing. And have a good weekend. See you, everyone.
Enjoy it. Thank you. Thanks, Rob. There you go.